Your metrics are perfect. Your decks are always polished, but nobody ever laughs in meetings. Fear is running your organization. Not the obvious kind, not the screaming managers wielding toxicity. No, this fear is masked as excellence. High standards that are actually high anxiety. Teams that talk about collaboration but never change anything. People showing up on Sunday night, dreading Monday morning. Today's guest is Chris Deaver, author of Brave Together, and we're going to be talking about the experiences that we're all having right now and how they're shaping our work, from what you feel when you see performative vulnerability from leadership to the fact that there's a good chance you'll encounter someone today who is going through some kind of existential crisis right now. Because it's not just happening at the highest levels. It's not just governments, nations, or world crisis. It's your life. It's my life. It's the person that you just slacked. We're all in what feels like whitewater rapids, and team members are flying out of the raft daily. And what makes it worse is that we keep rewarding the superhero behavior, the lone genius, right? The person who takes it all on themselves. It works in the short term. Then they get promoted, they get visibility, and then it quietly taxes the system. So today we're going to cover how to interrupt fear without lowering standards within your organization, why comp and promotion systems reward visibility over collaboration, and what to change about that first. The superhero tax, so to speak, when capable people think isolation is a strength. How to build culture through deep, shared wisdom, deep empathy, and shared principles, and why we need to hope again, and what that actually means in practice. I'm David Rice. This is People Managing People, and if your organization looks successful on paper, but nobody actually wants to be there, this conversation is going to show you how to build something different. All right, well, Chris, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I want to start us here. So when we were talking before this, we were talking about this idea of being brave together, that being the kind of organization that we can create. And I think what we're implying here is that fear is the hidden operating system in a lot of workplaces, right? So I guess what I'm asking to start us off is, what does fear look like in high performing orgs where maybe it's amassed as excellence? And then how do leaders actually interrupt it without lowering standards?
Yeah, I love that question, because innately it implies that, most people are after trying to get the job done, right? Do better, do more with less, especially in the environment we're in with, competing against or with AI, and teams really diving into solve that challenge. And I think for leaders especially, it's if you're performance driven and you want to get results. The paradox or the challenge is that strength or that pursuit can start to get in the way of itself. And so by trying to drive towards performance, we all remember the classic like Bobby Knight, coach who, got a lot of wins, but after a while that method started to break down. Throwing chairs, it turns out, at people doesn't work very well. And you had like a Coach K show up who, was much more, focused on empowerment and autonomy for his players. And I think, and hey, maybe there was a time in the season, but I think what we're seeing definitely in today's world is the kind of leaders who empower people to work together. And what it does is it breaks them out of that system of fear. And, when we think about it, that feeling of fear, if you show up, whether in the office or psychologically on a Monday morning or Sunday night, you're preparing for the next day, it's not just a terrible feeling, fear, but it's also a terrible driver towards those results, right? And we see this in sports teams too. If they're just afraid, it's not going to work out very well. And so I think, leaders' number one job is, have a focus on winning, of course. But if you do it in a together sense, where you're bringing people along for the journey and going up the mountain together, not stepping on each other on the way up, that's going to really power your team.
Yeah, I think we're seeing it right now with the AI stuff, right? Like the people who are reacting out of fear, they're learning it maybe because they've got this fear of obsolescence. I think we're seeing it yield worse results, right? And I think excellence driven by fear always feels brittle. It's like one mistake and everything fractures, right? So it's interesting you say it, because I've seen a lot of orgs where the metrics are great, but nobody laughs in meetings. And it can look like, if you're in an org, it can look a lot of different ways, but it can look like polished answers and tight decks, but there's really like no surprises. You know what I mean? There's like no underlying dissent ever. Like you'll hear like people talk about spirit of collaboration, but in a meeting, nobody challenges anything. And it's like, well, that's not actually that coming to life, right?
That's
so there's
right.
a difference between high standards and high anxiety. So I'm really interested in this.
Yeah, that's a great take, because I mean, it is. It's anecdotal, but it's true, right? It's what we really feel. Yeah, I think, and it doesn't help, that I think the size and scale of disruption, right? There's been massive layoffs. In fact, a lot of these leaders are afraid for their jobs, right? And so there's real fear that they're experiencing on a whole different level than they've ever had. And, boomer generation is retiring generally. X's are kind of taking on a lot of things. And, they're classically like, being part of that generation. I know it's like tactician, pull levers, strategic, right? Have a vision of the future, but really try to like solve things that you feel. And then if the sky's falling, it feels a little dystopian, being able to lean in and have grit. And that's a strength, right? But if you, to your point, if you walk down the street, this is the best test to me, and you ask somebody, hey, you want to join the organization? What's your vision? Execution. Like, they're going to turn and run the other way. Like, they're not going to have any interest in that, right? But if you say, hey, you get to do the best work of your life with, with a team that you really love being around, and, product services that you love, and that could be any industry. And in that case, and by the way, this is going to get, not just the results or the performance that leaders want. It's going to be 3, 4, 10x. We've seen this.
Yeah, it's interesting you called out like the older generation there, because I think like we've seen this return to sort of like tough strongman type leadership, right? And then we're also seeing this like superhero mindset, and that's like you've got people operating in silos, trying to do it alone. And I'm curious, like, where does that solo behavior come from? Is it personality? Is it incentives? Is it leadership modeling? And if you had to change one system, be it, comp, promotion, or meeting norms, or whatever it is, what would you change first to sort of reward this brave together mentality that you're trying to drive?
That's a great question. I mean, we see it all around, right? And I think part of it is to do with this generational shift. But again, the strengths of, say, if we're talking Gen X or maybe the tail end of Gen X, raised by wolves, be home by dark, right? Survive that dystopia. Maybe there's probably bullies. There's probably big bosses to pass through, like on every, level of walking to or home from school. But I think, the strength there is people that can lean in a really tough time and pursue things with hope. But to your point, the risk or the downside can be those superhero, take it all on behaviors can be counter. I mean, what are the Avengers without everybody, right? Now, granted, Iron Man, he's key, right? Like he saves, a lot in Captain America, but, it's a team. And I think leaders who can recognize like, wow, I need to max out my contribution. Good. But also how can I help max the contribution of the team and me as a component of that team? And so I think for leaders, it's being able to, let's say, break out. Hey, be brave like you're being brave. That's huge. Great, because like we need more of that. It's definitely whitewater rapids, and it's not safe canoe trips down the river anymore. But if you're gonna be brave, yeah, do it together, because like all the great bands, we saw Beatles when they broke up, they were never as good, right, as individuals. U2 has transcended time, or Coldplay, or look at some of these bands, what they've done when they stayed together. And I think that's just more proof that, and by the way, that's also, we see it in their business results. I mean, it's like, that's both things. Yeah.
And we're talking about this at a time where like the system itself of how we work is very fragile, because AI is changing everything, and sort of it's easy right now to get into a silo, right? Like we celebrate the hero story so much in our culture, right? It's always like the lone genius, the fixer. It's like cultural mythology. But that superhero behavior, I think, like it gets rewarded in the short term, but over time, it quietly taxes the system. And I've seen, I've worked with people who are incredibly capable, but actually isolated, and they think that that's a strength. And it's fascinating how often like leaders unintentionally model that I'll just do it myself kind of behavior. I mean, I was actually just talking to somebody about this yesterday, about what's going on in their workplace. And I got thinking about, comp and promotion systems often reward visibility over collaboration. And then what ends up happening is the culture follows. So I think there's some vulnerability in saying, I don't want to do this alone, but it's actually like the thing that you've got to do now as leaders.
Yeah, these dangers are being exposed on a level and at a pace that we've never seen before, right? And like, it's like emperor's new clothes. And I'll say it, like, the irony here is that trying to be a superhero in that way. Now, granted, I don't want to diss on, like, you got to make the hero sacrifice, right? And you have to be that kind of leader who embodies the character and the principles that are going to inspire people into the future. That includes vision and execution. So you got to do those things, but not at the cost of these other things. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think, hey, if it's about like this technical stack and delivering what nobody else can do, like, the guy who, it's just like, hey, when they call, it's going to be, the guy in the chair, and he's going to pull it all off in the next day. Well, guess what? AI can do that 1 trillion times better than that person. And so I think the question is going to be, and look, knowledge work has become commoditized, right? And in a world where technical is no longer the kind of strength that it used to be, and it's not an excuse, again, to ignore that, because you have to be deep in the details. If we talk about any of the successful kind of leaders that, or we consider successful, the Steve Jobs types, Elon, or anybody who's in the details of their business, they know it. But they also have had to come to a place to acknowledge, and sometimes this is a journey between the rough leader and becoming a changed leader, right? The story arc, and you look at like Steve Jobs, for example, he was a rough leader that got fired from his own company. Why? Essentially, he was becoming a silo, right? And a lot of those a-hole behaviors that some people glorify, or that he shows up in Hollywood or the movies it has for him, unfortunately, it's not the full story, right? The story that happened, and the way he was able to truly transform his cultures into the future. And look at Apple, still one of the most valuable companies in the world. Pixar, has continued to produce incredible films. And I think the difference was when he was in the wilderness, he didn't, and I've heard this from Ed Catmull, who's a friend and a mentor. He worked for Steve for 26 years. He talks about this in his book, Creativity Inc., is that Steve was able to step back and get humbled and learn about compassion and empathy. Even though he wasn't still amazing at it, he was much better at that. And then also this team notion. He recognized that there's power in the team. And so when he came back to Apple, it was about bringing this design team, Johnny Ive, those guys, and, operations, software, the brain trust that Ed Catmull, at Pixar does. And they did this in such a wonderful, powerful way. But it's not unique to him or to that particular business. This is, true of organizations of the future. It's like, are we going to try a self-made approach only, or are we going to do it in a shared way? And if you're doing it shared, there's so much more power in that. And we're talking, all the bottom lines, people, profits, impact to the world, all of it. Yeah.
When we talked before this, you made a sharp point. If ChatGPT can dump sort of information and consultants are being disrupted, then what we're seeing really is expertise is becoming cheap. So what becomes rare and valuable then? Like, if you had to describe the new leadership value prop in one sentence, what is it, and what does it require unlearning from people at the top?
Yeah, I would say it's co-creation, right? And this is duality. There's duality about that, but having the muscle memory built in of co-creation. And as a leader, instead of thinking in terms of employer, employee, boss, people, it's how can I be a co-creator, with my team? And what this does is it enables connection, right? What you described earlier, that feeling that, hey, it's not a problem to not only is not a problem, we need to prioritize that first 5 or 10 minutes, just check in with people. Like, how are you doing? Like, how are you really doing? right? In one-on-ones, in a team setting to the extent that you can. And what that does, it creates space for people. And by the way, usually we think, oh, I don't got time for that. Or some leaders do. They think I don't have time for it. And then what happens is they try to fast forward, and by ignoring that, it takes more time. Because to your point, there's a tax on the system versus 2 steps back to go 100, 10 steps forward. It's, connection and, collaboration, horizontal, right? I think you're asking the right question, which is what, if AI can do all of these things, and by the way, we're only at the tip of the iceberg. Like, we don't know all of the stuff. Like, the next wave of AI is going to be literally like it was with bots in factories, sitting in and accomplishing all these task-oriented things and workflows that any person can otherwise do. So then the question, to your point, becomes what's rare, what's unique, what could make me kind of a unicorn in the system? But overall, like, what's going to differentiate us in terms of humanity from this stuff that we've created? And I think it is these elements: connection, collaboration, and what that leads to is co-creation. And if you're building stuff together as a team, and with AI, I'd say, hey, don't ignore, like, it's not an either or, right? I think we have to position these things together. And like a great movie, like with Avatar, they synthesized the technology. They didn't go all 3D. If they did, it wouldn't have been as good. They actually invented cameras that filmed like Zoe Saldana's face and then blended it with technology. I think that's an analogy to me of you blend the best of AI with yourself and your team. And by the way, your team, look at ways to do it as a cross staff, right? The best brain trusts, like at Apple with the camera brain trust team, they meet together every week as software, representatives from software and hardware operations, and they sit in a room and they view themselves as a team. So this is like a cross staff meeting, and there's zero ego and there's building blocks on the table. And this creates agility in your organization. It builds these horizontal connections that are cemented. And so, because you're going to have all this technical stuff, and by the way, it's only going to get more crazy, right? With all the needs of customers and everything. So then the question becomes is how do you install and instill and ensure that muscle memory that's so strong, those fibers that are strong in the organization together? Because again, to your point earlier, we live in a world of silos, and they've been built over many decades in organizations. And so you have to be really intentional to get this right.
Yeah. I mean, I love where you started there with the co-creation piece, because I think unlearning the need to be the smartest person in the room might be like the real evolution. For a long time, like, information was power, and now it's, interpretation now feels like the power because information is everywhere, right? So if everyone has access to the same answers, I think leadership becomes less about knowing and more about discernment, the ability to choose, right?
So true.
That's like what are we going to ignore and what are we going to prioritize? And I think wisdom is like it's almost more invaluable than like just intelligence. I'd say, like, it flips the status hierarchy. Can you be like the calm synthesizer that beats the loud expert, or not beats, but you know what I mean? Like, that's the role you're playing now.
Yeah. It's context, right? It's a story, it's the narrative and the patterns. And these are things that, to this day, AI doesn't do as well as us, right? Like, there's a human element to that. And it's really our origin story in terms of humanity. And we've gotten really good at wisdom when we attune ourselves and dial into it. And so I think harnessing that strength and the timeless principles, right, that can power us as we, look back and, the ancient wisdom. And, I think AI at best is approximating that. And I would say that now, currently in the future, all these arguments about what the future, or debates about what the future of AI is, and these concerns have to actually do with it being non-principled or not really having a moral center of gravity. And I think, well, that's something clearly that's in our wheelhouse. And, to the extent that not only do we ground ourselves in principles and timeless principles, but also ask ourselves, like, what are the first principles of our culture, right? And of our work and of our products and services. And as you shape your first principles, well, you can start to build a future that is differentiated. And most organizations either didn't start this way. They talk about values, or they put something on the wall about their vision, but really it's about what the first principles that they embody. And culture as a perpetual motion machine, right? Culture is the great differentiator ultimately, and that's the culture around us, and in our teams and in our organization. And we're in a weird time too now where things have inverted, right? Where the enterprise wants to be a startup now. That's weird.
They want to run leaner.
Yeah, because they have all this bloat, right? These layers. Mm-hmm. And they're all these commoditized knowledge working, systems, layers, and frankly, people. And it's an unfortunate circumstance for a lot of people. Frankly, it is, because now it's like, how do we consolidate this? Really just shave off all this stuff. And startups are, I think, in an advantage. This is the great disruption of the organization itself, in a very significant way. And I don't think we've ever really seen that. And it scares people because, we have predominantly probably white collar workers or knowledge workers, across the board, at least here in the United States. And so, it is a challenging time. But I think for someone, if I'm out there, and I am, I think we all are, it's not asking ourselves the question of like, well, what's going to go next? What shoe's going to drop next? And just waiting for the sky to fall. I think it's, as you're saying, it's like, get positioned, right? And what's that deep wisdom you can rely on, those deep skills that can harness the power of your hard skills that are technical, or amplify them, right? Because if you stack, with those technical skills you described earlier, because they don't go away. Like if I know engineering and I can help build a rocket, it's like, great. What happens if you stack the ability to collaborate with other people, the best of who can do that as well, and then collaborate with AI to do that even better, right? All these things start to stack, but it takes deep skills and the things we're talking about. I think intuition, compassion for each other and for humanity. And with a vision that is, I'd say, hard charging or urgent, right? Urgent.
I love what you said there about it being right in our wheelhouse. I just, did an article the other day about, this is really a trust crisis. Like at the end of the day, I don't think people are scared of the technology. They're scared of the people who are making the decisions around it, who are essentially driving what it does in the world. That's what people are afraid of, because they don't trust inherently the institutions and the people who are making those decisions. So it's
well, and rightly so, right? Like, and again, not to diss too hard on Gen Xers, because I think this could be any generation, or even the incumbent boomers before. Like, there were a lot of lever puller answers for leaders, right? Right when this started to happen with AI, it was like, oh, we're cutting 8,000 jobs because AI, right? AI is going to solve this. And there were a lot of assumptions made that we're seeing now may or may not be true, right? Because ultimately, you have to have architects or people that are playing the hub or the integrator, and to your point, the synthesizer. And those skills also, frankly, weren't always as valued. Seeing kind of the gestalt or the big picture and then be able to influence across macro and micro. I wouldn't quite say generalist versus, the other. I think this is more, it's broader. It's like be able to influence horizontally and vertically. And I think that skill set, wasn't always seen in the light that it is now. And I think leaders are coming to a realization that not only do they need that kind of talent, those kind of people, and to shine a light on them, they need to be those kind of people. And that's a very different mindset for a leader.
There's a lot of mindset shifts going on. And I think, like we talked before this about the sort of how leaders perceive psychological safety, right? Like a lot of them hear that, they interpret it as like comfort. But I think when you're talking about like this idea of brave space where people can say the true thing, not just the polite thing. I'm curious, what are the practices that make a brave space real? And what are the red flags that tell you it's turning into either fear-based silence or performative vulnerability?
Yeah, that's a great question. Man, you're on a roll. These are all great questions. What's helpful for me is just try to simplify this down. And, because we were in a time not long ago, just recently really, where it was, to your point about psychological safety. And I think that's a good thing if it's done well. It was all about safe space, but in the extreme, that can mean to some people, oh, I just need to be not say anything, right? I like, then they don't voice what is kind of at their core, and they're not being brave. And, it's not about offending people. I think the question is how do you raise a safe space into a brave space? And I think the answer to that is simple. It's built inside of us, our mind and our heart and kind of spirit or principles. What happens often is we either lean into, and this is a battle that happens politically, it happens in a lot of topics, right? Mind versus heart, right? And it's like, then we go one extreme or the other, right? And I would say business has been on the mind extreme for a long time. The science of management, it's science, not art, right? Not humanities. Even though a lot of consulting companies would hire humanities because they got to balance it out. But a lot of science, very prescriptive, right? And to your point about expertise, vertical, silos, do your job, task-oriented, job descriptions, check, check, check. I just saw a post by Naval where he said, like, basically, careers are dead. And it's all about building stuff together essentially. And I heard this from Thomas Friedman, the world is flat 20 years ago. I was in a conference and they asked him the last question. I'll always remember it. They said, what's the future? And he said, it's writing job descriptions. And why? Because we have to amplify this humanity side, the heart side. And, Brene Brown, for example, has taken this heart side and made it a whole practice or a business. I love some of her stuff, but I would say, in the extreme, if that's the only answer, you lose the mind side and it's out of balance. And so I think, and what I mean by that is like, hey, if it's all about everybody showing up as their authentic self all the time, then somebody's going to offend somebody, or somebody's going to probably say something that, is really incongruent with either the subject at hand or whatever's necessary for driving the business forward. And it's not that that's the only goal, because again, we want connection, but we want it in a way that feels universal or can feel connective, like connective tissue. And this happens in the greatest teams, right? And again, going back to sports teams, not to overdo the analogy, but you look at how do they do it? Well, there's heart and they have a strategy and a plan. They also have a great coach and they follow principles. And so I would say a brave space is all about how do we amplify the focus on heart, having solid connection or deep empathy, and mind, having that shared wisdom we talked about earlier, and then principles, be powered by principles. Principles tethers this together, right? Because if it's just this battle of facts don't care about your feelings, it's like, well, feelings don't care about your facts. And we could just go back and forth all day long about who's being offended by cycle. Who, right? It's so pointless. And trust me, we have enough of that. So
there's plenty.
Yeah, but the tethering power of a principle says, oh, okay, you know what? We are about this North Star, right? We want to make the best products that enrich people's lives. Okay. And so you have feelings about that. You have feelings about, what's going on in your life. We all do. And we also have this vision of we want to build stuff together. We have to listen to each other and try to understand and not have ego. And so let's build, let's get to that state of just, being and staying in build mode. And I've seen it. I've seen teams like at Apple or other places where they're doing literally the best work of their lives together. And they're people who would otherwise disagree on a lot of topics, as far as, personal political stuff or whatever. Right. But they're not focused on that. They're focused on, we're human beings and we want to make the best things together. We want to do our best work together, and that's the future.
I mean, I like what you say. You brought up the whole bring your full self to work thing, and I always think that's nobody means that. I mean, you don't want me to bring full David to work. It's just going to be a running series of bad jokes, So I think going back to the idea of performative vulnerability from leaders, I think it's worse than silence, because two reasons. One, it either looks like progress but isn't, so it creates false, everything feels like BS. And that's really the second part too, is like, if it feels disingenuous, then it's going to undermine my ability to trust whatever the mission is. And so like, I think like, what I like about the idea of the brave space is that it feels tense sometimes. Yes, there's friction, but it's also pretty clean. Like the ability to say the true thing in the service of work, the work that needs to be done, that you're all, like you said, you're all trying to build the best stuff of your lives together. That's maturity, right? Yeah. There's like, it's the difference between being raw and being responsible.
Yeah, yeah. And we've all felt this, right? We've been in moments where, and one of the best tests of like on a reflection to say, like, to see how we can categorize or label what we've experienced as brave space is flow, right? Like that state of flow that you feel. And I love the research around this because it's true. You doing the things you love, right? Like playing music or whatever it is for you, art, painting, reading, playing sports, like where you feel like you're one with that experience. And then when it's with other people, right? It could be one other person or two or a whole team. And, especially in a work setting, but like you could ask ourselves like, wow, we could ask ourselves, when was the last time, or when was when you felt, when you had that feeling of just you're working as one? And you can see it in these teams, right? Again, not to over reference on the sports analogies, but I love some of these because, these are indicators of where the future is, where you see these. I mean, look at Indiana. Like, I don't know that I can name a single player on their team. Maybe the quarterback, but he was like a 2-star recruit. Like these guys, it got rejected by 139 colleges before going to UC Berkeley 3rd string. Then he transfers to Indiana, who's the worst team, and they come together. And yeah, a great coach, granted, right, which tells you what a leader can do as far as influence to shape a culture. But also look at that team. They don't have what anyone would consider like the rock star talent that everybody looks to buy that will, in their mind, solve everything. In fact, Texas Tech did. And trust me, my BYU team, they're in the Big 12 conference, and that was brutal to lose to Texas Tech. And I'm thinking like, why is this happening? Oh, they had a time window where they spent, a lot of money, these billionaires on NIL. And, and granted, BYU, all these teams are, doing NIL. So it's like, hey, more power to them. But they lost. They didn't win, ultimately. Indiana won. And, still a great team, Texas Tech. But I think what it shows, and when you see, even in college basketball last year, Florida, Houston, I can't name a single player on any of those teams. What it says is, it's not about the rock star as much as it is building a team of stars, or a team that rocks together. And they could be stars, but really that rocks and that can do these kind of things. And we felt that, right? And usually it wasn't about like, oh, because we had this one guy on our team. It's like, well, yeah, maybe. I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a Michael Jordan if you have one, or a Steph Curry, but you may not necessarily need that, right? I think you can be building incredible things together still.
Well, we were talking before this, you drew a line between hard skills and soft skills and what you called like deep skills. And that's sort of like, you got to strengthen that core to be that brave leader, right? So if I'm an HR leader listening, what are 2 to 3 deep skills you'd actually build? And how are you going to build them in a way that isn't just another like training program people end up ignoring?
Yeah. Well, first, having lived in the world of HR, I would say I would advise, as I would myself, don't be Toby. From The Office, people don't appreciate that. I think, and HR gets a bad rap. It's tough because like so many things look like they're just being thrown over the fence, and they look like compliance. And I think for an HR leader, as is true of any other leader, in the sense of what we're talking about, is how do you bring creative solutions to the fore, and not just like, hey, I'm thinking about but help bring people in early and do it co-creatively. Some of the best work I've seen from HR leaders is when they show up with leaders and they start to shape what they're building, but they do it in a way that the leaders feel ownership. And, they're shaping a strategy, a people strategy, talent of the future to, be future ready. And they're doing it in a way that is not only congruent with that leader, but again, feels like, wow, we're co-creating this, or even that it's theirs, right, to own. The best work in HR is you become invisible, right? It's like the antenna team with the iPhone, their job was, and there's like 100 of these people, but they would tell me all the time, like the design team with Johnny Ive, they're just like, our job is to be invisible, right? Like we want to create so much like value out of the work we do, the craft, that it's so inspiring. And I think that, because again, it's not about the HR program or, the horizontal, the expertise, where it comes from. It's like, how can I help power these leaders and teams and organization forward? And it really, I think about it like, what's the next level, right? If this thing's a triangle, how do you get to the peak, right? Or a mountain, right? Because there's always the next level or the next wave. And again, going back to what we were talking about as far as the history of business, if you zoom out, or organizations, if you zoom out far enough, or work itself, industrial age, manual worker, totally disrupted, right? It was by factory bots, et cetera. And, we've settled into that, what that world basically starts to look like. Now that could even change with the robots, right? We went from that to information age, which was totally ubiquitous. It's been commoditized, knowledge workers, et cetera. These went from efficiency as the goal to effectiveness as the goal. And those are still good goals, right? You have to execute, et cetera. But now it's co-creation all the way. And it's a contextual age. And as you said, it's kind of like a wisdom worker, or integrator, connection worker, where you're partnering with people, and you're not just working harder and smarter, you're working creatively together. And what that does is it powers the other things too, but it does it in an innovative way, right? I think the innovator's dilemma was true about products when Clayton Christensen posed that. But I think it's more true about cultures themselves and organizations themselves today, and leaders themselves, right, than at any other time, right? So it's kind of like this leader's dilemma of, hey, am I going to be the guy who, keeps sticking to what worked, the default settings, which by the way is increasingly not working. You also have this entire population of Gen Y and Z who their starting mindset is collective, right? And culture. So like the old notions of, hey, I'm going to check the box and you're going to do what I say and command and control, it's way out of the question. And, hey, good luck with that. They may get in line for a short period of time, but they're going to be out as soon as they possibly can. And we're in a time where the pendulum swing between employer or employee friendly job market is like, I don't think it's that clean anymore. It used to be like, whoa, it's heavy this way, it's heavy that way. I think it's actually a messy one, but what is true is the most talented people, the people that are doing the things that we're talking about, the ones that you really want on your team, even though you may not know it, but you do intuitively know it. Well, they're the ones that are high agency, and what they appreciate is a ton of vision and a ton of execution and a ton of partnership together all the way throughout the journey. My favorite leader of all time, I sat with them and I thought, this guy is the guru. He's just going to tell me what to do because I trust him, right? He'd already built trust. He had the heart thing in place. And then I asked him like, hey, what do I do about this situation? And he goes, well, because it was outside of my scope, right? This is above my pay grade. This is him. I'm asking him basically like, what are you telling me to do? And he would say to me regularly, he'd do this often. He's like, well, if you were in my shoes for the day or for the week, like, what would you do? And he meant it. And then I would share that answer, and then he'd start to shape that solution with me. And then he'd be like, hey, I think that sounds good. After I'd start to work on it, he's like, I think that sounds like a good approach. Like, what do you think? You think? And I was like, yeah. And I'd just be waiting for permission, but he was empowering me to do it. And that's leadership, right? And it made me appreciate him more. And again, going back to the heart, mind, spirit, he was converging those things, the principles of empowerment.
Yeah, I think like the best leaders that I've seen, they have some level of emotional range, right? They're steady, but they're not flat, right? Like it's the stuff that shows up when you're under pressure. And I think that as we think about the skills that we need in the future of our orgs, like that's a big thing for HR to consider, is like, how do we build that intentionally? Because if we don't, culture and sort of the ways of working that we have in place, they're going to build it sort of haphazardly or accidentally.
Yeah. Well, and again, the paradox of this, and you're absolutely right, 100%. I think the paradox of this is that for a leader, then the question isn't, the first question shouldn't be, how do I show up this way? That's part of it. But there's a prior question or preface to this, which is, how do I go deep, right? First, regularly, that I make it a practice. We're talking about and so the HR leaders can influence this, but I think influencing it in yourself, right, as a leader. Because if you show up this way, so first is how do I do that kind of, in things like meditation, prayer, I go deep and I ask myself, and we talk about in our book, Brave Together, available on Amazon, by the way, about the mirror test. And the mirror test is this question of what can I do differently? And it implies that I'm looking deeply in my own soul to be a better leader. And I'm asking it as a genuine question, because I truly want to know and I want to do more and better as a leader for others. And I think if that's the starting point, there's so much power in that versus, hey, how can I just show up and pull some levers and influence some people to get stuff done? That's surface, right? The deep, and again, the paradox of deep is because if you're doing the surface, the input is the output. You're going to be creating that surface reaction and approach that these other people behaviorally will take down the chain. They'll be saying, how can I just get this done and check the box and move on with my life? And you get, just like they say with the brain, I don't know if it's true, but I like the concept of we only use about 10% most of the time. Well, you're leaving all that potential energy on the table that could be kinetic, right? And going back to, if you do it deep as a leader and you hone in on those deep skills, and there's a lot of things related to this. It's simple, things we know, different dimensions of our lives. Spiritual is deep, meditation, prayer, etc. But asking that question of how can I be better? Physical, you're taking care of yourself, exercise, walking, whatever you do. Mental reading, all these things that challenge you, and relationships. And if I'm doing that and I show up as a leader, people are going to interpret and feel, most importantly, because you can't fake. I think what we learned, especially the pandemic, COVID, you can't fake any of this stuff, even though that was already true, right? But we had those polished words and phrases like exec presence, which I always hated, because I'm like, what does that even mean? What the hell does that mean? It's like, if I show up, shouldn't I just be me? Be one. I learned this from Stephen Covey. His kids would say, the guy that was out there in the world influencing and leaders and stuff, that was him. He was one, right? When he was at home, it wasn't perfect, right? Had his moments as a dad. But I think if you're one, you're not showing, and granted, there's context, you have to, deal with things differently in certain situations, situational leadership, but be one. And when you're one yourself, you can help your team to be one, and the best teams are one. And this helps customers because, man, if you have a product or service that feels like you're one with it, those are the kind we love, whether you're talking about Nike shoes or products or, any kind of service, anything in any domain. If there's a sense of love about it, yeah. And I think that's a good question for leaders to ask, which is how can I build a culture that people love? Starting with myself. Do I even love, if I show up and I'm having a meeting and it's agenda driven and it's check the box. Do I even love that experience? No. My daughter has a great phrase for this. She's like, I don't love that. And it's a gentle way of saying, I sometimes it's I hate it, but I think, it sounds so maybe Pollyannish, but you're love, and really what you're asking is, do I care deeply? And most leaders do. I think that's the thing too, is if you do, well, why wouldn't you harness that and direct it in a way that really converts all of this 90% of potential energy into kinetic energy with your team? And it's possible. And if it feels like change, it feels hard sometimes, That's okay, and you're not gonna be perfect at it to begin with. But deep skills are also like listening, right? And asking powerful questions. I mean, you're doing this right now. You've thought deeply about these questions. We're having a conversation that was prepared in advance. I think, and you dropped questions in advance, right? In an email. So I think that's something um, leaders can do as well. Think about, and they do this at Pixar. They'll send a question out a week in advance. So instead of like just an agenda, you have an agenda, you have a direction where you want to go, but maybe frame a macro question, which is like, hey, this is really what we don't know. And so people come and they're like, they're more prepared because they marinated on that. And it feels more inclusive of, not just inclusive of like a person's voice, but when you show up, it's like, hey, we're going to have a fun, even a fun debate. It's going to be healthy. We're going to do some rock tumbling. We're going to come up with some good stuff.
It's like, well, I thought you gave a good example earlier when you were talking about the leader who kind of pulled you in and they were asking you questions and you figured it out together, because I think lead with the question is a very powerful approach. And it does feel very collaborative, but there are moments, right, where like the board wants certainty, or the team wants your direction, or the market feels like it's on fire, right? And then there's these moments where leaders feel like they have to have an answer. So I'm curious, what does question-led leadership look like without sounding vague or indecisive?
Yeah, there's a time and a place, right? I think
Right.
the framing, like at Disney Imagineers I worked with, I love the approach. They have a what they called expansion and then contraction. And essentially it was like two different meetings. It doesn't have to be designed that way, but I love the concept or the principle of the thing, because in expansion, it's like all yes and. Like you wouldn't shut down or criticize ideas. It's like, let's just expand all the possibilities. And then you get to, contraction. And essentially you could say that's direction. Like now that we've expanded the room, I like it as two meetings, but sometimes it depends on the context. But to your point, at some point it's contraction, it's direction, right? We've had the conversation, we've looked for alignment, and maybe you're going to come into a conclusion as a leader that may be counter to some people's opinions, but you've listened to them and they know you've listened to them, and everybody feels heard, right? Everybody's had the talking stick, right? The Native American talking stick. They know that I feel heard. And you know what? When people do that, the defenses are down. They're also more likely to lean in, right? Disagree and commit. We talk about disagree and commit, but I see leaders using that as like a flashcard where it's just like, you didn't disagree and commit when I just came in hot. And you're like, well, you came in hot and you didn't even care what I had to say, right? So again, it may feel like 2 steps back or 5 or 10 steps. And that's because it takes an investment of time. It takes intention to do this well. But when you do, and when you're able to air it out first as leaders together in a team, and this could be about a leadership team too, because there can be egos in those places, or just opinions, strong opinions. But we're all trying to get to a point of view. So how do you get to a shared version? I think creating that kind of brave space where and it takes time, but you don't have to belabor it either, right? Like, you've put some of the time in. It's like, hey, we feel, pretty good about this. We have some disagreement here. You can call that out, right? Be like, got to move forward, right? Let's, and here's why. Then you share context, right? The story, which is, hey, here's where the direction we're going. And guys, ladies and gentlemen, I know that there's some, still some discussion about this part of it. And I hear you for these reasons, but we got to do it this way. Here's why. And I believe that this is the North Star for us. And this kind of leadership, by the way, I think it's going to be the future. And, again, river rafting, we're trusting the guide sometimes, and sometimes you're the guide as a leader. But I think to the extent that as a leader, if you're viewing yourself as a coach, then that helps a lot, instead of just like the player among the team who's shouting at the team. It's like, yeah, maybe, but you could be, player coach. Are you inspiring people? And yeah, providing a direction. That's also a vision, but it has vision baked in. Like that's going to help people.
Well, yeah, I think what I would just kind of add on this is like, you're right. There is a time and a place, but I think there's also like a difference between asking because you don't know and asking because you're inquiring, right? So like a powerful question can create alignment just as fast as a rushed answer, or much faster than a rushed answer, really. And like, there's a line that I heard once, and I always share this with like my contributing writers when they're creating content, is like, certainty is comforting, but clarity is far more useful. And so like, yes, you can take like this hot take stance and it's, push it with certainty, but just speaking with clarity and like framing the problem correctly before you solve it will create a stronger sense of connection for the reader. And like, it's the same thing, because what you're doing as a writer is just sort of leading a reader through this thing, this problem, right?
Yeah.
So I think like leaders need to realize like, you don't always have to provide answers, but you do need to provide direction. And so like, inquiry can be very decisive if it's anchored in intention and values, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing about being brave, in particular, being brave together, like we talk about in the book, it doesn't have to be polarizing necessarily, right? Because if it just has to be something that you know to be true, or you know enough, you're approximating, right, to the best that you can, the truth. And to your point, yeah. And by the way, like in writing something or a piece, like converging on that, you do want there to be a hook, right? But it doesn't have to be like a clickbaity thing, and it doesn't have to be pushing people like in one extreme or the other. I think again, we get so locked in on these extremes, and we see sometimes out there, and another phrase that has gone away largely that I'm glad, to some extent, personal brand. I don't hate it. I think it's important, right, to be, but why not just be yourself, and like because if you're trying to artificially contrive something, but I also think like there's power in this collective sense of, and it's an and answer. We still have to like but having an original voice. And I think in our original voice and being brave in the context of together, again, doesn't have to mean, hey, I disagree with you. Here's why, or I disagree with this. Or just non-conforming to non-conform. Now, granted, having said all that, we're in a time that the requirements list of the future is a different requirements list of even the most recent past. And I think there are requirements in that list of like, take like the Sir Ken Robinson talk on TEDx or TED years ago. It's like still number one, I think. Why schools kill creativity. I think businesses have killed creativity. And that's painful, because creativity is one of the components of the future. Shared creativity as a team, imagination, right? As Albert Einstein would say, is more important than knowledge. Why would he say that? Because look, knowledge could get commoditized. It is right now. And knowledge in the cursory sense, right, of aggregation of information that humans have produced over time. At best, AI is like, I'm gathering data from what everybody has produced in the past. That's great. And it can make some conclusions about the future, but it's a consolidation of the status quo if you really think about it. So how are you taking an original point of view? And to your point, in writing, I think especially, like, how do we ensure that and I have to challenge myself with this as a writer too, because it's so much easier to be like, hey, Chad, I call him Chad, ChatGPT, just spit out this thing and, whatever. But like, if it's not, it's not going to be as coherent or as powerful as if we're being true to our voice. And if we're true to a collective voice, as we're being true to our voice, together, there's power in that. And this is true about the kind of impact we all want to have in whatever our business is, and whatever we're leading, team, organization, whether in HR or any function for that matter. I think those are the kind of things that really resonate with people.
Oh, we're getting close on time, so I'm going to ask one last question. I want to bring up, when we talked before this, you had referenced The Fourth Turning. I love that book. It's so relevant right now. It feels like, this is like definitely something we should all be paying attention to, and, considering the ideas that are shared in that book. But there's an idea in there, like, that different generations bring different defaults. Maybe it's grit, or you mentioned with Gens Y and Z, it's this collectivist mindset, right? And I think the risk that is here, leaders retreat into what worked before, right? My question then is, how do you create a shared brave leadership culture across generations without turning it into, back in my day, and you don't get it, you don't get it kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it's a temptation, right? Because whenever we get into talk about generations or demographics, it's easy to default into our own kind of autobiography of where we sit, right? But I think I look at it like that's data that informs directionally where we want to go. And where we want to go, getting back to the being one, is, and granted, there are strengths for each generation. But it's about how do you combine these building blocks? Gen X, I'd say it's what you said, grit, right? It's the ability to drive towards a direction. Sky's falling, the river rapids are hitting, you're flying out of the raft, everybody's flying out of the raft, but you're going to stick with determination and persistence to see it through with the team. Gen Y is like, hey, we're all a team here, right? Their unity is like extraordinary, that strength. Now, again, in the extreme, these things can be problematic because the Gen X thing can be like, hey, I'm just going to grit my way through it. I can outlast all of you. It's like, is that helpful to the team? Like, you want to go up the mountain together. Gen Y, in the extreme of unity, it's like, then there's no variety. It's just like, hey, we have to, and then you can't even do this, right? It's like, we're all going to be authentic. And, oh, wait, you said something that offended that person. And it just gets crazy. It's like a circus, right? And then Gen Z, I think they want to solve massive problems that are at scale, but like fast, which is crazy, right? But like culture, right? So they'll show up in an interview and be like, what's the culture like? Can I change the culture? And you're like, and trust me, I think that's something we all want. But so the thing is like these things in their ripple effects are affecting us all. But as you said, I think looking at this question, which is how do we combine these strengths into this shared, call it Gen Brave, right? We're moving in a direction together. And these are all parts and pieces of this collective, and as a culture overall. If it's a person, I like to think about cultures and companies as a person. Like Disney was very nostalgic. It's older, literally like 100-something years old. Kind of moves slow. So when it acquired Pixar, it was like, oh, okay, I'm young. I'm feeling young again. It's starting to infuse that Pixar culture, which is great. Apple was more like, a little older. Has kids. It's like got it figured out. And then there's this culture about our lives and about the whatever organization you're in. And I think the question there too is like, how do you start to shape that culture of the future with these different elements? And, as you said, fourth turning is like, we're in the crisis. And we're in the crisis phase. If we track with those guys, and by the way, they like predicted like the 2008 crash, like they predicted stuff that like, and nobody even noticed them back then. Now it's like, oh, wait a minute, what's this whole thing? Because they're seeing patterns at the macro level over millennia, right? The secular, the 80 to 100 years. And then at the micro level of America as a melting pot. And, they say like, hey, this thing's going to wrap up like early 2030s, but it's crazy until then. So I don't think we're getting out of this like unscathed. I think we're in for another, what is that? 7, give or take years of just some pain. The beauty of it is there will be a rebirth. And if we're leaning into, and by the way, as a lot of systems and organizations continue to get disrupted, we're seeing this in politics, right? Governments, systems that people hadn't questioned at the depths, speaking of deep, are looking at things and saying, I'm going to shake this, right? And we're all kind of saying like, oh, wow, that's crazy. That's painful. We've all wanted to do that for a while. And again, partly Gen Z on that one. But the good news is if you lean in and you have these elements, and the building blocks of culture really, which is again, deep, shared wisdom, mind, deep empathy, heart, and being powered by principles, spirit. We talk about this in the book, Brave Together. It's like, you're going to be able to shape culture. You'll be a culture shaper, be a future shaper, and you're going to help build that shared future that we all want. And it's not exclusive of those dreams. It's a shared dream, right? Because tracking again generationally, we'll have the culture change we want. We'll have the unity that we want. We'll have the drive towards the grit and the focus on the future, that North Star. And if you take the boomers, we'll have, that, I call it performative, but the appearance too, but it'll be based on substance.
Yeah. Well, all these things are complementary, right? Like the tension between generations, I mean, it gets hyped up a lot, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, it can be a strategic advantage if it's surfaced in the right way, right? And it's less about age, it's more about adaptability. That's what we're seeing all the time. You can be 60 years old and doing fine in an organization because you find ways to adapt all the time. And so I think like, there's somebody that I can't remember where I heard this, but they said shared standards mattered more than shared style. And I always think about that. Like, yeah, like you can, there's a million different ways to do whatever it is that's got to be done, but it's about the standard of quality and like how you're going to approach it and the mindset. All of those things will define your success far more than sort of your technical style or how you did like these small tasks. At the end of the day, most leaders, I mean, what you find out throughout your career, right, is like they don't really care how you got there. Did you get there or not? So it's kind of, I think we got to like think about, yes, it does matter how we get there, but we all got to be a little bit adaptable on how and what we think. I like that you're talking about principles because it's something that I'm thinking about a lot as well. I think it's a key challenge for leaders during this time.
You know, it is hard. And again, we're in the river raft and you're flying out, team members are flying out, the river guides catapulting over the top. But at the end of the day, you get back in and you're better prepared for the next one, for the next rapid. And in fact, you may not even be shaken like that again because you're ready to flow, right? That shared flow as a team, and you're leaning in and being brave and you're better positioned. And I think, you know, that's, to me, I take heart in that because I just find like every day there's so much stuff just hitting. Like the world is going nuts right now, right? And it feels crazy. And I'm telling you, we talk to people, exec coaching, and in any organization, it's so crazy because we'll have conversation where they're like, oh, I'm looking to change jobs. Like, and they just got there. Or like, oh, I'm getting laid off. Or this is happening. Or it's like, this is whatever it is, it's existential. And so when we say crisis fourth turning, it's not like, see, I think that's the thing that hit me too, is like, it's not just like this concept of, hey, at the highest level, government, nation, country, world, crisis. It's like, no, my life, your life.
The guy that you pass in the parking lot is like having an existential crisis.
Right? And so, yeah, so I heard one time a wise man said, and I'll just close this, he would said, hey, if you just bank on the fact that whoever you meet or talk to, and this includes the people we work with, is going through some kind of crisis right now, probably 80% or plus, maybe more, maybe 100% now, you're probably right. And so how do you treat someone, you know, and this also gets to how we work together, how we treat each other. Like, then how do you treat someone who's in crisis? How do we treat ourselves when we're in crisis? But I think that's where, and I'll close with this, one of my favorite moments in a movie. The movie doesn't particularly stand out to me, but this moment is huge where Dr. X in X-Men, Days of Future Past, the future version of him is the world's collapsing, right? Everything's on fire. They're all going to die. It's the end. And then there's a past version of him who his world's just fine, right? Everything's fine, except he's a wreck. He's going to, it looks like, end. And so this future version, you know, cuts through time and says to him, the one message he has is, we need you to hope again. And I think if there's a message that we need, we need to hope again. And hope in the sense of build this intention, do it every day, right? Start small, but create that momentum in the ways we've talked about, and it will power you, your culture that you just build around you at the depths, and it'll expand, and you'll be able to do things you've never done, and your team and your organization have never accomplished, that are the impossible.
Well, Chris, thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. It's been a good talk.
Thank you, David. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, listeners, be sure to check out Brave Together. Also, if you haven't done so already, head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/subscribe, get signed up for the newsletter. And until next time, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of principles, start bringing them into your work.